Hi everyone, I'm Spiro. Welcome to this week's episode of Newsbud's Roundtable. As everyone is well aware, America has been in a perpetual state of war for some time now. Over the years, we have witnessed the atrocities of war broadcast on our televisions, and we've also experienced those weapons of war coming home, everything from MRAPs to drones. Now this week, we will showcase a Newsbud exclusive article from Erik Moshe titled Drone Casino Mimesis, the Wheel of Misfortune. Now this article draws very interesting parallels between the gambling capital of the world and what has become the main operating hub for drones operated by the U.S. Air Force in Las Vegas. At this time, I'd like to bring in our guests, our panel today. We are joined by Erik Moshe, a Newsbud analyst and writer, and Professor Joseph Pugliese, who is the research director of the Department of Media, Music, Communication and Cultural Studies at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. And of course, I'm also joined by the one and only Sibel Edmonds. Hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Very well.
Hi, everyone.
Sibel, can you tell me what you thought about Erik's latest piece of his drone exposés that he's been writing for Newsbud?
Oh, absolutely. I read 5 to 10 articles detailed. I'm talking about really reading a day. And usually I engage in speed reading because even though there are many brilliant articles out there on really important topics, you get to this point, especially with the current topics, the current political topics, subjects out there. A lot of things come across as canned that you see everywhere. You know, you may go to New York Times Open and you just read the same thing, let's say Mosul or something on Zika virus. But and I had read several, besides Erik's great work, books and articles on this whole artificial intelligence and also on the drones. But this article particularly got my attention because I just it stopped me on my track. And I said, wow, this just never occurred to me. The symbiotic relations between the gambling industry, especially the glitzy, cheesy, risque city of Las Vegas, and the fact that the drone bases are positioned there and more bases are moving there. And when you start looking at the concepts, the characteristics of this gambling city and what they do, and it is a form of gambling, no matter what they want to throw about accuracy, etc. It was one of those angles that you don't see and you don't hear about. And I had this great professor for literature, and when he was talking about Emily Dickinson, we had this chair in the class. He took this chair, he turned it upside down. He said, when you're looking at her poetry, you want to look at it not only like the chair, the way you look at it, you want to look at it from the side, you want to look at it from the bottom, turn it upside down, then look at it to really get the picture, to really try to get the meaning. Well, the same thing with this approach with the drone is it's looking at this whole frightening phenomena from a very fresh, interesting angle. And I know Erik did a fantastic job narrating it, writing it, and researching it with a distinguished guest who has done immense level of work in this. And so all my antenna was, all of them were up and kind of turning. And I kept thinking about it for 2-3 days. I majored, one of my majors were criminal psychology. So I was relating to that field as well. So instead of going and yakking and talking here, I want to bring in Erik and then Professor Pugliese and get into this topic more in depth, especially since Erik has been writing these series on the drone as the topic from so many different perspectives. I mean, we had the stuff with the film industry, what we are watching on TV, to this angle with Las Vegas. So he's the man here who has been presenting all of us these different pieces of puzzle related to drone, and this very interesting pictures emerging. And I just love the fact that he picked this method. So instead of, a lot of people, they write an article, a one-time deal, two-time deal, then they move to another topic. Erik, you've been pounding on this topic, and now you brought this element. So let's start with you, and then from you we can move to Professor Pugliese.
Definitely. Well, first of all the credit goes to Professor Pugliese for his very original idea. I thought I did a decent job of presenting it to the public in a way that's accessible. Sibel, wait until you read it in its entirety. It's actually on Sage Publishing, but I'm able to get it for free since I go to school at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. It was an article that was very eye-opening because I'm going to Las Vegas on November 11th for my best friend's honeymoon. So I'll be there. Hopefully I won't be thinking about drones. Hopefully they won't be buzzing around my head like Tweety birds while I'm there. But it's definitely good to acknowledge the realities of your surroundings. And everywhere you go, every state, there are military bases. But it's a little bit of a different game, literally a different game, when you have drone bases, because they're a very traumatizing place of employment for a lot of people. And this has become a little bit of a crisis in the military when it comes to military affairs, because they're searching for more drone pilots to fill the seats. And of course, when you fill the seats, then there are more people in the Middle East who fill the coffers. Consequently, it was just a very interesting article. First of all, I just wanted to ask Professor Pugliese about how he first got the idea for writing about the lexicon of casino gambling and how it interfered. Was there a word or a phrase that immediately caught your eye and you said to yourself, "Wow, I need to inquire further"?
Yes, well, as you can see from the actual article, I did go there and took a number of photographs, and I had a very dear colleague at the University of Arizona, Professor Susan Stryker, who knew that I was working on drones and Nellis, and she said, "I must take you out there." And we spent a couple of days there, and I did take the photographs. What struck me immediately was, and you can see this in the actual photos that are reproduced in the original article, was the striking juxtaposition of civil society with Bambi-like figures in front gardens, signs saying, "Beware children," really staring down the military-industrial complex at its most lethal, and that is Nellis Air Force Base. And that really provoked me to think, what is the relation between these two sites? I'm in the gambling casino capital of the world. There's a sense of a civil front here with front gardens, suburban lots, and a festive atmosphere because of the casinos. And yet I know this to be one of the epicenters of America's secret war. And I call it a secret war because you have acknowledged in your articles the way really the drone kills are running under the radar, including when the US kills its own citizens, like Anwar al-Awlaki and his son, for example, and his friend. So really that was the provocative moment when I got there materially and saw these stark juxtapositions between civil society and the lethal killing machinery of drones sitting next to each other.
And you did a very thorough job. It was actually a little bit intimidating because when you're a student at a university and you're reading work by professors, you can't really put yourself on a level playing field when it comes to what it takes to actually write these pieces. You've probably read at least 50 plus books in order to give yourself the background information on each element of the work. So it was inspiring to me to read it, to know that one day maybe I might reach that level of just dissecting theories and applying them to present combat drones, for example.
Yes. Well, you did an excellent job in really making my work accessible to a larger public, and you didn't compromise at all. It was so focused and accurate, really, in its mapping of the key components. As Sibel said, you really work in a mosaic manner and put all the pieces together. And I actually think that that's the most important thing we can do as critical analysts or media journalists, and that is to join the dots, really, and see that things aren't working in isolation. There are actually hidden infrastructures and relations that we need to identify and name and expose, because then the complicities of violence become much more complicated and interesting because they're hidden in a sense. And I guess the whistleblowers, Sibel, do exactly that. They show those hidden aspects which otherwise would not come to light.
No, absolutely. Completely agree with that. Uh, I want to bring into this the role of media, because we also have been observing the way the media has been reporting on this. Let's say if we were to compare that to what was happening in the late 60s and early 70s with Vietnam War. I'm not saying the media was great back then, but relatively speaking, the media played its role in presenting to the public some of the horrors of what we were causing in Vietnam. And I know, other than draft, because we had the draft back then, so we had more resistance, a lot of pictures they published and a lot of articles went a long way, getting the public saying we don't want this war, and increasing the level of activism within the anti-war movements. But what we have been seeing, especially since 9/11, with all these wars, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, they stopped placing any of these photographs showing the horrors of what we are doing over there. I grew up in several countries. I grew up in Turkey, in Azerbaijan, and also in Iran. My father was a surgeon. He was a doctor. And between the age 9 and 11, 12, he would take me with him to hospital where he was a surgeon. And they would bring these war victims. They would bring these little babies who had been basically melted from the bombs, and 90% dead, and their skins and everything, features, their nose were melted. So they had to drill holes and then put this little plastic tubes to give them air. And you're looking at 9-month-old babies, you're looking at a 2-year-old child, you're looking at a 90-year-old grandmother. And to us on the ground experiencing that was war. Now, take that and compare it what we are seeing in the United States, thus the public opinion. From the concept of drone to what it actually does, there is complete disconnect with the reality and the normalization, because it's some kind of an abstract, yeah, that's good, we are not losing too many people, the drones are accurate, they're computerized, and they are hitting the enemies. They are not showing any of these casualties, the torn apart babies. They are. So what we have, therefore, we have an uninformed public, and we sometimes call it apathy. We're saying, well, where's the reaction? Why aren't we hearing from the people? Well, this is one of the reasons, okay? And now with what you brought up here with these soldiers and the terminology used that are actually parallel, the same terminology as in gambling, and dehumanization of what they are doing, which is absolutely strategically implemented, because you basically is slamming a bug on a windshield. Basically, this is not human you're looking at. Basically, for the drone pilots, you're looking at bugs. Okay, yeah, and it's fun. It's like, again, the other parallel is like those computer games that we see kids constantly playing. Bang, you're killing, you're taking out. So there is no sense of, we are looking at innocent lives. We are looking at human beings. We are looking at babies. None of that. And that is absolutely put in place by design from the military industrial complex, the military system here. And in a way, in some way, some of these pilots, I consider them victims as well. They are being experimented upon. Okay, the type of music they play in the background when they are engaged in actually taking away human lives. All of those are put in place by design. But yet, you mentioned whistleblowing, Professor. We have had a group of pilots, drone pilots, who came out, they blew the whistle. They said how immoral, how horrifying this whole process, this whole drone operation was. And then we are looking at, let's say, hundreds, thousands and thousands of them. Why do we see such small group? Why we are looking at 10 or 15 or 20 pilots who basically say, we are out, we are not going to engage in this. And then we have 99.4% continuing and not showing any kind of reaction. In your opinion, what is causing that difference?
Well, I think that's a complex answer, but I also think that there are a number of factors at work there. One is the way in which I think drone kills and the way in which they're conducted and the sites from which they're conducted create, first of all, you've got the medium, which creates a distancing effect, precisely because so many of these young drone operators and pilots have been trained literally through video games. And in a sense, this is what I say in the article, the PlayStation mentality gets transposed to the lethal military killing process. So you've got a sense that you're not really killing human beings, and that's amplified through the abstracting, dehumanizing language, as you called it, by which they name their targets. So, as you said, a successful kill is called a bug splat. Why would you feel anguish and trauma over the killing, as you say, of insects that have been squashed on a window screen? So there's a complete objectification and instrumentalization of human life and a reduction to something that we would consider absolutely worthless. Secondly, their targets, they've got abstracting language. They call people who run, as they're being caught under the crosshairs of the drone, squirters. What does that mean? Dismounts. So these aren't human flesh and blood beings. They're abstracted terms. So you've got a level of language, really, that begins to dematerialize the human targets and their flesh and blood capacities. Secondly, you've got overlaid on this the jackpot casino language. To kill someone successfully is to score a jackpot. That's what they call it. And simultaneously, you've got now some of the whistleblowers telling us that because viewing the drone footage is incredibly boring, because there will be hours and hours where nothing much happens. And now you've got whistleblowers saying that they're actually transposing chess, battleship games, and bingo on the same media infrastructure that creates the lethal kills, and they're actually killing their time playing bingo, chess, and battleship. So you've got this absolute imbrication, this enmeshing of literal video games with lethal video games. And so there's a continuum there that doesn't cause a sort of startling disconnect about what you're doing, playing on the one hand, and then playing, or as they call it, gambling with people's lives. And a lot of those drone operators actually say, we are gambling with people's lives. And often I'm the front line between letting someone live and letting someone die. So there's a sense of absolute sovereignty over someone's life. And because of the technology, you get the sense of distance, remoteness, and also absolute omnipotence and omniscience, because you can see every aspect of their lives. You can see tribal gatherings, weddings, funerals. All of these have been drone targets. All of these have created hundreds of civilian drone kills. So you can see there are complex factors here in terms of the actual media, the crossovers between medias, between gaming devices, between casino gambling, the language that the pilots use, and the technologies that the pilots are actually using, and the distancing and remoting effects that those technologies have. And in a sense, that begins to explain why so many lock themselves in. And they actually talk quite explicitly about compartmentalizing. That's the word that they use. They compartmentalize the drone kills as something separate from their lives, and really, I would say, from their moral bases. Because what happens when you can compartmentalize your moral core is that you can actually execute someone extrajudicially, as drone kills do, because everyone is guilty by association. There is no legal procedure to demand that you prove your innocence or guilt. Everyone is already dead, in a sense, once they're under the crosshairs, and that's the end of the story. So I think there are a number of factors all impacting on how and why drone operators really continue to play the game, so to speak.
I have a question for you, Erik, because I think this is a major issue question that nobody has really answered really, and for me it started right from the beginning, and that is the reports of the kills. Okay, when they come and say we killed 45 Al Qaeda today, we killed 20 ISIS today, and I say, first of all, how do you identify who you have killed? How do you identify before you kill these individuals? Do they like kill and then go and search their body and find ISIS ID card? There's an ISIS driver's license. Or do they walk around like with an ISIS headband on their head? Because you're looking at 14 years old are counted as an ISIS target. So when it comes to target identification, okay, both before they kill an attack and also after, walk us through what you have come across, because as far as they are concerned, when the media is reporting, they get the report from the US, yesterday the operation, in Mosul or in Yemen resulted in 14 ISIS being killed. 14 ISIS, who identified them as ISIS to hit, and who identified them and confirmed their identity as ISIS members afterwards. Because according to them, even a fetus can be ISIS, because we have seen so many pregnant women killed. And were they target? That's because they are carrying ISIS fetus. I mean, I'm not trying to be cute here. What I'm trying to bring up here for people opening up New York Times, Reuters, and then looking at it and saying, oh yeah, well, yesterday we killed 40 Al-Qaeda or 35 ISIS. How do we identify these individuals? Because in the past, the wars were between militaries of nations. We no longer recognize any nation's sovereignty. We are not actually in war with any military. We have created these abstract names, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, and we are killing women, men, children. It's not a military base. It's not the government. We are killing ordinary people, and we say we have killed ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, or whatever you want to go ahead and change, because 4 years from now, they're going to come up with a different brand name. So tell us a little bit, Erik, what you have come across when it comes to this identification issue before and after.
It's a very interesting point you bring up, how they actually quantify and what training that the intelligence apparatus goes through in order to identify terrorists or identify ISIS militants. I wonder what type of characteristics they're looking for when it comes to gathering intelligence. Because when I was in the Air Force, on a few occasions I was in an intelligence briefing. I can't discuss what happened, but it wasn't anything intelligence heavy, because I was only a mechanic. But it shows that there are group settings where people give their opinions, and they have a blackboard or they have a PowerPoint presentation, and they might debate on what the logistics of an operation is and who they're going after, who is inside what house, hut, building, hospital, you name it. And I think that it would be interesting to kind of discover and dig deeper into how intelligence training actually occurs and how they target these individuals through signature strikes, which is they search for a pattern that they recognize, and they can actually strike based on that signature that they see, regardless of if they guarantee that it's actually a militant or a suspect. And there's also precision strikes, which is when the intelligence is probably a bit more of an anvil that has pressure on the situation. They recognize a face, they receive a word from someone in the local population. But we've seen time and time again that this geopolitical conditioning can reduce a military age male to a child, as Professor Pugliese has demonstrated in his piece. And also, in addition to that, you can also see that it's a very vague thing to identify men who are supposed to be militants. Sometimes they don't have guns. Sometimes they're firing guns and they're on camera, which is an exception. There was actually a video that RAF Waddington that I'm doing a little bit of research on for my next article, and they showed that a militant was firing along a wall in a compound, and they had the crosshairs ready to fire on him, but he went into a civilian compound. So they removed the crosshairs very quickly onto the side of the building, and they misfired on purpose. So there is an effort in the UK, at least, to to be a bit more humanitarian and to abide by the laws more. But it seems that the U.S. with games like Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, you name it, it seems that the American culture is probably a little bit more mired in a militaristic culture, to where they bring on these terminologies that they take home from the casino. I mean, it's a little bit bizarre, but it's good that Professor Pugliese has shed some light on that. I also wanted to point out that the drone warfare is not necessarily easy, because we only have 4 pilots, as Sibel mentioned, that came forward, but there are hundreds more. And every pilot that has interviewed with Professor Peter Lee, who I'll be interviewing in my next article, he described that it is not an easy process. They take it very, very, very seriously. And a few bad apples, as in any military has soldiers who may not be the most moral or exemplify integrity, they can ruin the rest. They can ruin it for the rest of them and ruin the reputation. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's not easy, but at the same time, it's complex.
I think that's a really good point, in that you can't shaft really the killing only to the drone pilots or the visual screeners, because they're really at the receiving end of the so-called kill list. And so in a sense, they're the ones that press the button. But there's already an infrastructure in place, an administrative, governmental, military infrastructure that does all the groundwork that enables that killing in the first place. Now, what is so problematic, and I think this goes back to the original question about the drone kills, is that on so many occasions we don't know the identities of those killed. And a report that I really exhort our viewers to read is the Reprieve report, You Never Die Twice, where they document that the US government has said, we have finally killed this Al-Qaeda, say, suspect, only for him to pop up a few weeks later, not once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but up to 6 times. And every time they have said that they have killed him, they have actually killed dozens of civilians, including women and children. Now, what is so problematic about what is happening here too is the fact that they're using, so, Erik mentioned the signature strikes, which basically focus on really problematic terms of suspect patterns of life. So middle-aged males who might be carrying a gun are already targeted as suspect, regardless of the fact that in a lot of these tribal areas, all middle-aged males carry guns. So they're immediately targets. Or that there's a communal tribal gathering, and this could be a suspect Al-Qaeda gathering. They have been targets. Weddings, funerals, as I mentioned before. So problems already in terms of the identities of those killed with signature strikes. Now, with the precision strikes that Erik mentioned, there are also serious flaws in that a lot of them are identified by geolocation software, and we actually owe this information to Edward Snowden, who blew the whistle and exposed that a certain geolocation software called Gilgamesh is being used. And what they do is they actually target the phone of suspects without knowing the identity of the person who's on the other end of the cell phone. So often they will kill someone who's at the receiving end of that cell phone, but he's not actually the suspect. So you've got people who are using someone, it could be a cousin, a nephew, or some relative or friend using that cell phone that belonged at some stage to a suspect on the list. They get incinerated by a Hellfire missile. And we don't know the fact of their identity until after the fact. So you can see that even precision strikes are predicated on the notion that you're killing someone on the other end with the assumption that they are who you think they are, but often they're not.
It's very interesting. Now, we see and we read more and more, especially lately, on not only drones, but all the different aspects of artificial intelligence and what's being developed here, and billions and trillions of dollars that is going into it, currently being in a unipolar world, a supposed super country that can rule the entire world. Can we take a look at the proportion of the countries, the target countries, and our so-called enemies, and who we are? I mean, I know many Americans, unfortunately, they can't even put their fingers on the map on Yemen. They wouldn't even know where Yemen is. And if they were to look at Yemen's GDP, it's one of the poorest nation out there, okay, despite having oil and oil reserve. It's a country that doesn't even have a real military. I mean, even if they have tanks, they are tanks from what, 50 years ago. Afghanistan in 2002. I went to Afghanistan several times in late 1980s. Well, Afghanistan, again, you're looking at targeting I wouldn't even call third world country. Maybe we should come up with the term fourth world country. You're looking at no military base, no military, no real government. Okay, you're looking at terrorists that our government is identifying as the caveman. They are inside the cave and they are engaged in these plots. Now look at us, okay? The superpower, okay, spending billions, trillions of dollars, just the cost of operation and each one of these drones, each bomb that we are dropping, and then take a look at the target nations. You know, if we were like during World War II, let's say if it was Germany or Japan, or if right now, if I'm just going to throw a country, let's say it's with Russia, because of some conflict and war, you could be looking at and say, okay, this is what we are looking at. But we don't even have people question the fact that the countries and the people we are targeting, not only that they're tens of thousands of miles away, they are countries that don't even have like a GDP that is more than $100 million. Each one of the bombs we are dropping there basically per day equals their entire total GDP. And have them pause and think and say, what in the world are we doing? First of all, what kind of threat those people there on the ground presenting to us here in the United States? And who are we really fighting? And that never gets to be really discussed. It has gone down this path that it's there. We have these wars, and they're undeclared wars. They are not sanctioned by Congress. They are not wars against any government. They are not war against anybody's military. And yet we are using these technologies that is going up. Could this be a sign of experimentation? This is a thought that has been occurring to me. Are we using these poor nations, okay, third world countries, as a test ground? This is where we are showing our might and testing our drone capabilities and so-called intelligence capabilities. So if we kill hundreds of thousands of people, their lives don't matter. We just call them Muslim terrorists and then we are done with it. This is just in case we want to send message to some countries or nations that maybe one day be real enemy or the opponent, whether it's China or Russia. Are these like test grounds? This is where we go, because think about it. Where else we going to really test these bombs and our drone capabilities? You want real life setting. Why don't we go and choose helpless, poor nations, okay? And say we test. You know, think about pharmaceuticals taking their drugs instead of testing it on rats, because it can't be as conclusive, right? Why don't we go to Africa and target some really, really poor tribal area and start experimenting with these drugs? Imagine the reaction of people if they were to find out. They would be outraged that we are using them as guinea pigs, experimenting on them with these drugs. But isn't it what we are doing? Because they are not presenting any threat. I mean, look at them. Look at these countries. Are these countries and these lives, hundreds of thousands of people that we are taking out, is this a nice, cheap way for them, for our military, for our government, for the military-industrial complex to just test their equipment and test their might?
I think that's a brilliant insight, actually. And I discussed that not in the context of the US and Yemen, Somalia, the federally administered tribal areas in Pakistan, Afghanistan, but believe it or not, in the context of another country that uses drones as much as the US does, but has gone largely under the radar, and that is the state of Israel in relation to Palestine. Now, I've actually written on this, and Israel calls Gaza, for example, a laboratory. And it does all sorts of military arms testing, particularly with drones, because they're at the forefront, as with the US. on the people in Gaza. And so in Operation Protective Edge, and I've actually published this, it's an essay in Borderlands called Forensic Ecologies, and I dissect the way in which there's a correlation between the deployment of experimental drone technologies during Operation Protective Edge, and then immediately after the conclusion of the war on Gaza, the way in which the shares in those companies that deployed those experimental drone technologies rocketed up, precisely because those companies advertised themselves as having technologies that are combat proven. So what we're looking at here really is what you're talking about, and that is the way in which we really must talk about the military-industrial complex and the profit motive, and the way in which I think you named in no uncertain terms the politics really of race and geopolitical standing in the world in terms of who gets bombed with impunity, and also the sovereignties that we can override with impunity. So think about this. As if there aren't terror suspects in France, Belgium, why don't we send drones there and violate EU sovereignty? Why don't we deploy drones in order to track known suspects there? So you can begin to see the asymmetries, and really the asymmetries that I talk about in Drone Casino Mimesis that are racially based, precisely because Afghan children are racialized as non-subjects, non-human subjects to which human rights don't accrue. And so they can be liquidated with impunity. And I think you were mapping there a whole cluster of forces, race, geopolitics, but also the arms industry in exercising really their right to experiment and to come out with combat-proven technologies that will raise the share price in the world marketplace of arms manufacturers.
That was really powerful. I'm sorry, Spiro, go ahead, because one thing I want to end my question here, and then I'll have you take on from there, is that, and that's to both of you, because of great work you have done with your research and what you have written, Professor, and you, Erik, what you have been doing and what you will be doing, and that is, we are looking at a bully, okay? Just this is like you get this strong bully in the school that says, I'm not accountable to anyone, and I'm beating up people because I can. And guess what? What are you going to do about it? And that is the unipolar world we have been living. United Nations, who really rules United Nations? The United States currently, with its military-industrial complex, is not accountable to anyone. It's this bully on the block and has been. And neither Amnesty International is owned and ruled by the United States. The United Nations is ruled and directed by the United States. So there is no power to hold it accountable. Therefore, it says, with this military-industrial complex, we can do anything we want. What are you going to do about it? Now, that's for the 0.1%, the ruling, the elite, the military-industrial complex, the top players in the government, Erik and Professor. But the question then becomes, we the people here in the United States, because we are taking part in it. The money that they are taking away every month from our paycheck, portion of it goes into that. Who do you think is purchasing from the military-industrial complex? It's our own government. Basically, giving it to Paul, that it gives it to Mary, and then that goes and gives it to. So that's exactly what we are talking about. It's done in our name because we say as Americans, we go and say we have representative government. We are a democracy, okay? And we like to make fun of the rest of the world or feign disgust and saying, look at that, they are dictators and third world countries. We are democracy, okay? Because if we say that, we say all these killings, everything that we talked about, all the numbers that we see every day, they are being implemented, is being done in our name, with our money, and with our consent. I'm sorry. We say they are elected. That means it is with our consent. I don't care what people are going to argue. It is. And in the eyes of the people in those nations, that's the reality. That's the fact. Now, with that said, and with the work you're doing, what are you hoping and what are we hoping to accomplish? Because we are not as helpless as they want to portray us, okay? And we can put a stop to this. Because as I said, we are funding it, we are financing this, and we are giving them consent. And what would it take, how much work, how much of these facts to come out to get people, us, here in the United States, because we are the bully. We are causing all this. And if anybody comes and tells you within your government and points to some nation and say WMD, there is one nation that has track record with WMD, and that's our nation. Whether it's the Agent Orange during the Vietnam Wars, whether it's the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, whether it's the Gulf chemicals that we used during the first Gulf War, we are the only nation that has this incredible track records of producing and utilizing using WMD. No other nation can even come close to us throughout the last century. We are the ones. We are the bullies. We are the WMD owners and users, and we are the ones who are causing this. And when are we going to take responsibility and say, we have the obligation? This is one thing that it's not only moral obligation that we can stop and we should stop, and is writing about it, the research paper in the university, in the academic environment, we doing it as Newsbud, with the articles and putting out these videos. Are we hoping to accomplish that, Erik? I'll start with you, and then from you, I'll move to Professor Pugliese.
The days of riding into battle with a battle axe on a horse to stake your claim and to make a difference and to change territory is over. I think we live in an age where it's mostly about creating buzz and attracting attention. And if you have prestige and power, I feel that it's much easier to do that. And I think you shouldn't undersell yourself, Sibel, because Newsbud and also yourself, you've been a brave spokeswoman for issues like social justice, whistleblowing, making amendments towards the military-industrial complex, etc., and Spiro as well, and scholars such as Professor Pugliese. I'm only a small cog in the machine. You are actually the enactors, and I don't think we're doing so bad with Sibel as sort of a frigate of justice, sailing up through the sea and trying to make a change. I don't think it's easy to postulate whether we can make a huge difference, because there are just too many guns out there. There are too many nations who actually want this stuff to happen. But I wanted to shift over to Professor Pugliese and then Spiro. I hope I didn't interrupt your thought process, what you were going to say. But I just wanted to ask if you could. I know this is hard to request just like instantly, but I was wondering if you could talk about some of the philosophy, the deep underlying philosophy that most people don't understand about war and politics and how that actually manifests itself in world events.
Before I answer your question, if I could just turn to the point that Sibel made about what is the purpose of, say, even having this Skype discussion that we're having. And I think prior to us going on air, we talked about, and you brought up, Sibel, the way in which the Vietnam War was a pivotal moment, really, in the dissemination about the horrors of war, precisely because we had a press that was largely unbounded and not embedded within the sorts of regimes of censorship that are now so operative post the Iraq War, the Gulf War, and 9/11, but actually could report truthfully about the horrible facts, the trauma, the atrocities that were happening on the ground. As we know, all of that now has been curtailed, and we don't see the face of horror in war. Now, in a sense, precisely because of that, it's a remote, telemediated fact for most American citizens. It doesn't register, and all they see is a blip, say, of the so-called surgical strike in the afternoon news. Now, I think that all we can do in the face of these sort of hegemonic forces, the military-industrial complex, the key elite, the political players, the arms manufacturers, is to try and penetrate and overturn, precisely as you did as a whistleblower, those regimes of censorship, and to establish platforms for information, dialogue, and education, so that people can become informed as to what is exactly happening, so that they can actually exercise their citizenship rights and call to account, say, governments that perpetrate massacres and atrocities at the moment with impunity, because we've got thousands of civilians in South Asia, as you pointed out, being killed by drones without them being classified as war crimes. So I think it's a small part that we can play, but it's an important part, and that is to coalesce as people committed to social justice issues and speak truth to power and disseminate these sorts of messages, dialogues, and counterfacts to what the government and the media industry are saying. To return to your question, it was about the psychology of the military in war, was it? Sorry, what was it? Can you just run by? Because I just wanted to answer the point or the question that Sibel had raised. Erik?
Yes, it was just the philosophy behind war and politics.
Well, look, sad to say, I think it can be boiled down to some pretty elementary things, and it's about exercising territorial power, might, and extending that power and might along different axes. Now, what is interesting about the drone war in South Asia is that really the US, through new technologies, can now exercise that expansive imperial securitization, as they call it, of territories with which they are not at war, but which they can plunge into these underground wars. And we call them underground wars because they don't register on the Western media, in the Western mediascape. And they can exercise the so-called securitization, the obliteration of civilians, by not having any troops on the ground anymore, but still maintain that sort of imperial sense of ownership over what they call the ungoverned lands of the South. And they literally call them ungoverned lands as though they're lawless or barbarians, etc. There's that racialization that I talk about in the paper operative there. So it's really about maintaining your status as a supreme power by keeping as much of the globe under control. And this sounds like hyperbole, but once you start to look at the drone example, I actually talk about the US's drone archipelago. So US drone kills aren't just being exercised from the US. A whole geopolitical archipelago of countries is implicated in this, including Turkey, Italy, Germany at Ramstein Air Base, the UK, Australia. They are all part of the kill chain. So you can see a conglomerate, really, of Western forces maintaining these asymmetrical relations of power over a targeted area, say South Asia or the Middle East or North Africa, which are all drone target areas now. So I'm not sure if that goes to explain some way your question, but it really is about exerting power and might in order to maintain your geopolitical standing, to preserve your privileges, resources-wise, in terms of status, wealth.
Well, we certainly have covered a range of topics within this topic here. Very interesting conversation. We've covered the secret wars, the perpetual wars, the victims of these wars, how they're conducted abroad illegally, and how the weapons of wars come home, and a lot more. And interesting points such as the compartmentalization within the ranks, and how our own environment, even our own family members, for example, a lot of people's children play video games, and our own environment kind of leads us into this predicament that we're in right now. And as we were talking about earlier, it's they're basically training the next generation of drone pilots, automated warfare pilots. It appears in a lot of respects. And Sibel mentioned the aspects of artificial intelligence and how that's going to be coming into the picture, and is already coming into the picture. And Professor, reflecting on all of that and moving forward, I wanted to ask you, where do you see this going? We see more and more drone pilots within the United States military, backing out, not wanting to continue with that program. And we've heard about the Pentagon wanting to outsource drone pilots to the private sector. Are we going to see war continue to be privatized in that respect, or are we going to see some reform coming when it comes to the indiscriminate killing of innocents and just labeling them, combatants, enemy combatants?
Yes. Spiro, look, I think you've brought into focus a really important and troubling point, and that is that what we can't do is to relegate this mass murder, really, through drones of innocent civilians to the state, in inverted commas, that there are a whole network of forces there that are actually civilian and are now implicated in the kill chain process. And the outsourcing is happening on multiple levels, from the maintenance of drones on the ground in the bases in South Asia and Europe, etc., and North Africa, to the actual visual screening of the material, the drone feeds. The outsourcing is happening. It's not something to come in the future. The only thing at this stage that the private contractors don't do is press the button and kill. The other thing is the outsourcing of the military, and it is something that I broach in the casino paper, is happening through the way in which now military arms and armament and kit and gear is actually being produced in private prisons in the US through slave labour, which again is racialised because it's mostly African Americans and Latinos working under the most appalling conditions of exploitation. So you can see here how civil society is actually now quite enmeshed in what I call civil militarisation now, where it's really hard to disarticulate and say the state is to blame, because no, a lot of agents and actors, non-state actors, are now part of the whole military-industrial complex. So my fear is that this is only now expanding and will exponentially expand because of the sorts of forces that are now in place through the private outsourcing, the contracting, etc., and the way it's in which war is unsustainable, really, when it's conducted on such a large scale and only drawing on resources of the state. The military now is outsourcing across the board in order to maintain its momentum and sense of being on top of this really complex game as they see it. So I'm not actually sanguine at this stage about the future in terms of this ongoing imbrication, this enmeshment between state military apparatus and civilians, which is why I think we need to expose those lines of connections, bring into focus the missing pieces of the mosaic that get invisibilized because no one's talking or covering them, and which show the complex lines of imbrication and enmeshment. Because once we can see how all the parts work, then we can take informed stands to begin to counteract and call to account through expose what is actually at stake, who the actors are, and what needs to be done in order to change the situation.
Well, that's an excellent answer. It's an in-depth, very, very good answer. So ultimately, I personally don't see the privatization of war being a good solution. I see it potentially as a way for the state to eviscerate and remove themselves from any kind of accountability. Do you yourself? What are your thoughts on that, Professor? Do you see? These companies, private companies, like let's say Blackwater, which is a very well-known company. They've changed their names how many times? If there's a gas station that nobody likes, it gets bought out. They change the name, they change the sign on the outside of the building. They're still pumping your gas. I mean, it's the same new boss, same as the old boss type thing.
Look, we saw the outsourcing, really, of terror, I would call it, during the whole war on terror, in that we had Blackwater implicated in a lot of the civilian kills in Iraq and also in the torture processes. We saw private airline companies being seconded by the state and become implicit in the the extraordinary renditions that basically picked up innocent people off the streets of Italy, Afghanistan, Yemen, etc., and took them to Guantanamo Bay. So I think all of these actors are there embedded now because of profit motives, especially within this whole complex military apparatus.
Well, this is definitely a topic that we're going to continue to keep our eyes on as it continues to influence our lives and the lives of millions of people around the world. Without a doubt, if these powers are not kept in check by the people, and as you pointed out, Professor, earlier, through information, informing ourselves is the first step to coming up with solutions and talking and the dialogue. So very, very great conversation here. I really enjoyed it. And speaking of dialogue, I hope those of you in the comment section will chip in and try to come up with some solutions, because we see a lot of times, we see the problems, but it's hard to come up with a solution, especially when you're fighting a giant behemoth like the military-industrial complex. But I'd like to go through here and get any final words from each of you. I'd like to start with Erik Moshe. Any final words this evening?
I just want to say, can everyone imagine how much better Joseph Pugliese's piece would be if he was actually allowed access into Nellis Air Force Base? Because he wasn't allowed. So I feel like it would be 3 times as long with many more terms to choose from if he actually had access. So I'm going to contact Dr. Lee, that I'm going to be interviewing in my next interview, and ask him what his secrets were for actually getting access into UK bases.
Thank you, Erik. That would be fantastic.
Professor Pugliese, any final comments, any final points that we may have not have covered that you feel we should mention here?
I would just like to underscore how critical a site like Newsbud is within a global context. And I say that precisely because so much of my Erik's remarked on the fact that I draw on philosophies and theories, but really I won't draw on those theories and philosophies unless I can ground them in facts, in material, empirical sites and figures. And I can only do that through the brilliant work of independent journalists. So with drones, as you would know, Erik, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism has been absolutely invaluable in disclosing all of the facts and statistics of the drone kills that the US government hides. So I draw on their facts in order to join the dots and in order to deploy the sort of theoretical and analytical frames that I've now been privileged to use, and then to back that up with the actual facts on the ground. So that when I say, they're not killing their so-called targets, often they are killing civilians, including women and children, I will draw on Reprieve, an independent organisation committed to social justice that is actually doing the investigative work. So I think these sorts of organisations like yourself, like Newsbud, are absolutely crucial to changing and creating transformative effects. Even though they are small, they are ripple effects, and they will create, hopefully, cumulative change towards social justice.
Well, thank you for that, Professor. We are committed to making a difference here at Newsbud, and we do have. I'm very proud myself to be a part of Newsbud. I know that there's a few others out there that are doing a great job as well, and the vision that Sibel has put together in establishing this team, and as you stated before, it's important and it's worldwide. I mean, we can cover so many different topics. It's not just your local news at 6 p.m. Kind of a thing, news and weather. So this is and as you know, this is just the beginning stages that we're in currently right now with Newsbud, and that'll bring me right into Sibel, who is obviously the founder and editor of Newsbud. Any final points that you'd like to cover here?
No, I have a very brief story, but I want to also thank Professor for bringing up Bureau of Investigative Journalism. I go to their sites all the time. They are fantastic, and I knew they were UK-based. I don't even know who the editor for the site is, but that is an amazing, amazing source of information, and they have been at it since the beginning, and they have been consistent. So I have to look and see how they are supporting themselves. They would be also on my list to support, if I could financially to contribute to them, because they have done incredible amount of work on the drones. When nobody was really touching it, they got into it. So I'm glad you mentioned them. I have a list of about a couple of dozens of websites, news sites that I visit regularly, daily, and they are on that list. Just quickly, my daughter, she's 8, she's from Vietnam, and a couple of weeks ago, I have been thinking for Newsbud, one of the things that I've been wanting to do is to have some independent photographers and camera people on the ground in places like Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and get our own footage, the real lives, whether it is what we destroy, kill, or the people in hospital, the families. These are the things that we are not seeing. So for that, I was also compiling some archived photographs that New York Times, Washington Post in late 60s, early 70s ran on Vietnam War. Some stunning photography. They were some incredible, powerful photography that they published in there that actually touched people. It prevented that apathy. I mean, today they have a photograph of a puppy stuck on the tree with 6 firemen trying to bring him down. And you have millions of people tweeting it and saying, oh, poor little puppy. And there they are. There they are, tens of thousands of children losing their parents. They're turning into orphans, or parents who are losing their children. There are no photographs. Therefore, it doesn't exist in the minds of people. Anyhow, my daughter came and she looked over my shoulder and she looked down and she said, oh, this is terrible. What is this? And I said, well, this is the Vietnam-US war that went on for many years. And she said, well, why? Because she considers herself American. She has been here since she was 5 months old. And she said, why did Americans, why our country went and did this over there? And I said, well, it's going to take a long time for me to explain it to you. It's because some bad people made bad decisions so that some other bad people get rich. And she turned around and she said, well, at the end, who won, who lost? I said, well, all the Americans, the normal, ordinary people here, they lost, whether it was by money or the people who lost their husbands or people who lost their legs and their arm. I said, all those people in Vietnam, they lost. So everybody lost as far as people goes. But those bad people who got rich, very few of them, they won. But what I'm trying to say here is it's never too early to start. And when we talk about the process of education, some people say you got to shield them. As we talked about, there are these video games there, and I see the same 8, 9 years old boys. They come to a restaurant or cafe where I go with my family, and I see these kids with this concentration and almost that violent look in their eyes. They are doing, what are you doing? I'm killing this, and I'm killing it. And what I have been trying to do with my child is answer the questions and get them to see the human side of things. And there are things that we can do, and there are things that we are absolutely capable of doing. It's only with the being informed and the will to implement it. And I'm hoping that together we are going to get closer and closer and get to that implementation point where we can stop these atrocities and we do things where people benefit. Because as I told my daughter, Vietnamese, they lost 1.5 million people. I said, Americans, the people here, they lost too. Nobody won except the very, very few bad people who got rich. And that will be it for.
Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Newsbud's Roundtable. I'd like to thank our special guest, Professor Joseph Pugliese, and our own Newsbud analyst and writer Erik Moshe, and of course the one and only Sibel Edmonds. Stay tuned for the next week's episode of Newsbud Roundtable. Don't forget, you can follow Newsbud on Twitter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out Newsbud Daily Picks. This is our own hand-selected news that we go out and pick every day. And don't forget, this is Phase 2 right now for Newsbud's Kickstarter program. We will leave links below. There's all our videos, tons of information there. And do your part to support independent media. Reporting for Newsbud, I'm Spiro. Thank you.